flesh. The jungle is full of mysteries, some beautiful, some terrifying, but few are as disturbing as what you are about to witness. Imagine a white tiger, a beast of pure muscle and grace, a creature meant to dominate the wilderness. Its pale fur gleams in the dappled light, its massive paws press silently against the damp earth, and its eyes, those piercing yellow eyes, scan the undergrowth for prey. But something is wrong. Beneath its thick coat, hidden just past the curve of its powerful shoulder, there is a wound. Not just any wound, but a nightmarish sight that makes even seasoned trackers avert their gaze. The flesh is hollowed out, as if something has eaten its way through the muscle, leaving behind a cavernous, honeycomb-like pit. The skin surrounding it is raw, swollen, and dark with infection. Tiny holes dot the surface, as if something small, something alive, is burrowing deep inside. At first glance, it looks like the work of maggots, a typical sign of decay in an injured animal. But this tiger is still alive, still breathing, still moving. That means something else is at play here. Something far worse. The wound does not close. The edges remain fresh, almost as if something is keeping it open on purpose. This is no ordinary infection. This is a living infestation. This is a living infestation. This is the work of parasitic isopods, creatures that do not simply feed on their host, but live within it, turning its body into their personal breeding ground, the architects of misery. Most people think of parasites as small nuisances, creatures that latch onto their host, suck some blood, and move on. But parasitic isopods are different. They stay. They do not simply take from their host. They become part of it. These creatures, distant relatives of crabs and shrimp, have perfected a gruesome way of life. They burrow deep into the flesh of their victim, latching on with hooked legs, their armored bodies pressing against the raw, exposed muscle, and once they settle in, they begin their slow and methodical destruction. Unlike most parasites, they are not satisfied with just one spot. Their goal is to spread, carving out new tunnels through the body, ensuring that fresh blood, fluids, and decaying tissue continue to flow. They prevent wounds from healing by gnawing at the edges, keeping their home open and exposed. This benefits them in two ways. First, it ensures they always have access to nourishment. Second, it allows their offspring to thrive in the perfect environment, a living, breathing, rotting nest. For the white tiger, every movement becomes agony. Each step tugs at the infested wound, stretching the open holes where isopods have taken residence. The tiger cannot rid itself of them. No amount of scratching, rubbing against trees, or rolling in the dirt will dislodge these invaders. They are too deeply embedded, too well adapted to resisting the body's defenses. The tiger's immune system fights back. White blood cells flood the area, desperately trying to close the wound, to rid the body of its unwanted guest. But the isopods are resilient. They do not just survive the attack, they thrive in it. As the days pass, the tiger grows weaker. It hunts less, its movements are slower, and its once powerful body starts to wither, not from starvation, but from something far worse. It is being eaten alive, the nest inside a predator. Inside the tiger's wound, the isopods multiply. The adults, grotesque creatures with spiny legs and chitinous shells, lay their eggs within the oozing cavity, using the warm, infected tissue as a perfect incubator. The larvae hatch into a swarming mass of tiny parasites, feeding on the blood and fluids that seep from the wound. Some will remain near the surface, devouring the surrounding flesh. Others will migrate deeper, traveling through the tiger's veins, burrowing into muscle, seeking new places to take hold. Over time, the wound spreads. What began as a single hole expands, branching outward, digging inward, turning healthy tissue into a landscape of rot and decay. The once majestic white tiger stinks of death, even as it continues to walk, to breathe, to hunt. But this is not the worst part. Some isopods do not stop at the flesh. Some have evolved to invade the brain. The puppeteers of the wild, parasitic isopods are known to do something truly disturbing in the world of fish. Certain species invade the mouths of their hosts, eating away at the tongue until they replace it entirely. The fish, still alive, now has a new living tongue that feeds off its blood while it eats. The parasite becomes part of the body, controlling its host while remaining firmly in place. But what if such a parasite found its way into a mammal? What if it learned to invade the nervous system, manipulating the host's movements, keeping it alive just long enough to ensure its own survival? Imagine a tiger whose body has become a puppet for the creatures infesting it. Its mind no longer fully its own, its muscles moving not by its own will, but because the parasites need it to keep going. A beast that should have collapsed long ago, still walking the jungle, not because it has the strength, but because the things inside it will not let it die. It is a walking corpse, a carrier of nightmares, a moving buffet for the isopods that now control its body. And when it finally collapses, the isopods do not die with it. They abandon the carcass, seeking a new host. The cycle begins again, the flesh thieves of the deep. Nature never runs out of nightmares. If you thought parasitic isopods lurking in the wounds of a tiger were disturbing, let's go deeper, literally, because while the jungle holds its horrors, the real masters of infestation live beneath the waves. They move unseen through the murky depths, small enough to be ignored, yet powerful enough to rewrite the anatomy of their victims. And unlike the isopods feeding on the white tiger's wounds, these creatures have a different, far more intimate method of survival. They do not simply burrow into flesh. They replace it. Meet Simathoa exigua and Lavonica, two of nature's most grotesque body snatchers. They are isopods, just like their land-dwelling cousins. But instead of rotting a host from the outside, they do something much more horrifying. They steal body parts. Simathoa, the tongue thief. Imagine being a fish, swimming peacefully in the ocean, when something small and unassuming drifts toward your open mouth. It looks harmless, maybe a speck of debris. Maybe just another piece of plankton. You open your jaws slightly wider, allowing it inside, thinking nothing of it. But it is not harmless. It is Simathoa exigua, a parasite with a singular, revolting goal. The tiny isopod swims past your teeth, heading straight for your tongue. Well, once there, it clamps down tightly, digging its hooked legs deep into the soft muscle. It drinks the blood, cutting off circulation to the tongue, slowly killing it. But it does not stop there. As the tongue withers and dies, Simathoa positions itself exactly where the tongue used to be. The fish, now with a new living parasite in place of its missing tongue, continues as if nothing has changed. It eats, it breathes, it swims, completely unaware that every time it tries to swallow, it is feeding the creature inside its mouth. This parasite does not just live in the fish. It becomes part of it. The fish's body accepts the invader, continuing life as though its real tongue had never existed. Simathoa does not kill its host. It does not need to. It is patient. It feeds for years, draining blood, growing fatter, all while pretending to be just another part of the body. A perfect biological deception, Lavonica, the face burrower. If you thought Simathoa's method of survival was the peak of nature's horror, think again. Its cousin, Lavonica, takes things even further. Instead of just replacing a body part, it creates its own space inside the skull of its host. Lavonica is another parasitic isopod that prefers fish as its victims. But unlike Simathoa, it does not stop at the tongue. It burrows deeper, forcing its way into the gills, chewing into the soft tissue behind the fish's head. And once it finds a suitable home inside the fish's face, it begins to carve out a chamber, a flesh pocket where it can live indefinitely. From the outside, the fish looks normal. It swims like any other. But inside its skull, there is a creature curled up in the darkness, feeding off its host blood. Some species of Lavonica have even been found nesting inside the eye sockets of their hosts, replacing missing eyeballs with their own twisted, pulsing forms. The fish does not resist. It cannot. It adapts to the invasion, continuing to swim with a living parasite lodged inside its face. It is a prisoner inside its own body. Why do these parasites exist? At this point, you might be wondering, why would nature allow such creatures to exist? Why would evolution design something that can replace tongues, burrow into skulls, and thrive inside the faces of the living? The answer is simple: survival. Parasites like Simathoa and Lavonica are masters of endurance. They do not hunt, they do not kill, and they do not overpower their hosts like traditional predators. Instead, they take the path of least resistance. Instead of competing for food, they become the food source. Instead of chasing prey, they attach themselves to a victim and wait. And most terrifying of all, they are incredibly successful. Simathoa has been found in fish across the world's oceans, proving that its gruesome method of survival is not just a bizarre accident. It is an evolutionary masterpiece. Lavonica, too, thrives in multiple species, ensuring its kind will never go extinct. Because for them, as long as there are fish in the sea, there will always be new mouths, new tongues, and new faces to infest. The final thought: what if it happens to us? Now, before you breathe a sigh of relief and tell yourself that these parasites only target fish, let me ask you this: what stops evolution from going further? Adapts to a mammal's body? What if it learns to target creatures larger than fish? After all, parasites have already evolved to infest the tongues of sea creatures, the brains of insects, and the muscles of tigers. What is stopping them from taking the next step? Perhaps all it takes is one mutation, one tiny change in its genetic code. And suddenly, a parasite that once lived only in the mouths of fish finds a new home in the throat of something larger, something like us. Sleep well,